or scooting. That's really high. And 61% are in favor of a bike lane on Adams, even if it meant the removal of a vehicle traffic lane. So that's very encouraging. We also often draft motions of support for neighborhood councils to consider. So this is what's going on. Actually, next week, we're doing another West Adams community meeting, and the following week, it's going to be considered at the neighborhood council. Another example is San Vicente between Fairfax and La Brea, again, being repaved in December. This is what it used to look like. This is what the street looks like today. It's basically a highway. It's got 9 vehicle traffic lanes, including parking and center turn lanes. And this is what it could look like if the protected bike lane on the mobility plan was implemented. So we're working on this as well. And Venice Boulevard is such an important street. It's the only street in the city of Los Angeles that goes between the ocean and downtown LA entirely in the city of Los Angeles. So we actually have a special website for this, VeniceBoulevardForAll.com. You can check it out. The first implementation of this between Culver and Motor, we're working with the Palms Neighborhood Council to try to get that done. This is what Venice Boulevard used to look like. This is what it looks like today. And there is a bus and bike lane on the mobility plan. So this is what it could look like. We don't always get our way though. Lancashire is a good example between Whipple and Cahuenga in the valley. Protected bike lane on the entire stretch was just repaved and the mobility plan is being ignored. It's just being striped for cars as it is today. Sepulveda between the 405 and Mountain Gate, the only street in Los Angeles that connects the valley and the city with a planned bike lane was just repaved without the bike lane. We couldn't even get Paul Koretz's office to consider it. So we need to get involved. We need to demand change. We need to show up at neighborhood council and city council meetings and advocate for things. And you can learn more at streetsforall.org/adapt. So with that, we're going to talk about 2 special projects. I'm going to turn over to Bubba.
Hey, everybody. I'm having bullet because it's smoky to match the weather outside. In Culver City, we are lucky enough to have a city council that is making some changes to encourage safe and equitable use of our streets, and not just those with the means and ability to drive. So if you go to the next slide, just a few months ago, traffic was backed up on Culver Boulevard every single night for hours at a time. And then, like communities all over the world, downtown Culver was decimated by the onset of COVID-19, and action needed to be taken to help this community. So this summer, Culver City Council and the Downtown Business Association worked together to completely reimagine downtown Culver, to not just help those suffering businesses. They also took the opportunity to reallocate the street space to be more welcoming to cyclists, scooter users, transit users, and pedestrians. So this is the before with 3 car lanes on either side of Culver Boulevard, and this is now. A new lane designated for buses, bikes, and emergency vehicles, and it's the only westbound traffic lane on this stretch of Culver Boulevard. The rest of it is taken up by dining. If you go to the next slide, you'll see some of that dining. And in the next slide, you'll see some cyclists using it. People are running on it in the mornings. Main Street is completely open to diners, cyclists, and pedestrians. Private cars are not even allowed, which is really cool. The community has embraced these changes, and the differences are stark. Every evening, the space has been transformed into a lively outdoor plaza of families safely enjoying the outdoors and patronizing our local businesses. Restaurants take your temperature before seating you at safe social distance. And just being in the area, you will see firsthand what a relief this project has been to both the businesses there and the community members. And so this, if you go to the next slide, this is all a part of a much larger plan for Washington and Culver Boulevard that goes from La Cienega Avenue all the way to City Hall and downtown Culver. There will be a bike and bus lane helping people without access to a vehicle get around safely and efficiently. If you go to the next slide, finally, slow streets are coming to Culver City. And after a lot of advocacy by Bike Culver City, council agreed on a pilot program in 4 neighborhoods across the city. The whole program is having to be made from scratch since Culver City is, a separate entity from LA City. So we're pretty excited that our city manager and traffic engineers are working on this. And we're excited that it's, distributed across different neighborhoods. So the TLDR of this is, if we fight for progressive city council candidates, there's so much that we can get done for a safer, more equitable city.
Thanks, Bubba. I'm going to talk to you guys about Uplift Melrose, which is still very fresh and is is a sensitive topic with me right now. Before I tell you what happened, let me show you what was to be. So Uplift Melrose was a project that was proposed about a month and a half ago by the Bureau of Street Services. This is what it would have looked like. How many streets in LA look like this? And it would have included raised crosswalks at every intersection, acting as speed tables. It would have included a lot wider sidewalks and LA's very first curb level protected bike lane, allotted with a ton of new trees and new lighting. And I've been very active as part of the Mid-City West Community Council, which I'm on, to really build a coalition of support. And so I, along with a few other people in the community, worked very hard over the last month and a half. We got both neighborhood councils on board, both schools, majority of businesses, and 71% of residents. And it would have been built with $50 million of free money from the state. And last night around 9 p.m., we found out that Paul Koretz won't even let the city apply for the money and vetoed it. So I could go down a rabbit hole and take the rest of the meeting, but I'll just say this underscores how important it is that we get progressive people on city council. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Adrian, who's going to talk about how we're using a list we built behind the scenes to better coordinate among neighborhood councils. Adrian.
All right, thanks, Michael. So we created a list of transportation progressives to try to coordinate amongst these individuals and neighborhood councils. So as I mentioned earlier, there's a motion that's pending in City Council to make slow streets permanent. And through this list, this progress list, we were able to reach out to many neighborhood councils and individuals who were able to advocate for this. And so as you can see here, there are numerous community impact statements that have been filed by neighborhood councils. And a community impact statement is one of the most effective ways that a neighborhood council can advocate for or against a city position. They're just a simple basic statement stating what their position is and whether or not they support or if any changes are needed. So there are 99 neighborhood councils, and we got about 10 of them to pass a CIS in support of this. So that's pretty effective, that 10% of the neighborhood councils are now all talking in unison to say that they want safer streets. And it's also possible in one's individual capacity to make public comment in support or against a city council motion. And that's what you see towards the right of the screen there. So if you are interested in joining, you could reach us at progress@streetsforall.org, and we will add you to the mail list and keep you posted whenever there is a city council motion that we need your voice for.
Thanks, Adrian. And just to clarify, email us at contact@streetsforall.org, and we can add you to the progress list.
Yeah, thank you.
Please don't email progress. Okay. All right, so turn it over to Taranig, who's going to mention some stuff on this about the state. Seleta, I see that you've joined. I apologize. We're running about 5 minutes behind, but we're almost there. Taranig.
Hi, everyone. So not all regulations that affect transportation in LA come from the city. Many come from the state level. So let's review some of what's going on in Sacramento. First, SB 288. This bill would allow green transportation infrastructure to bypass some environmental review requirements. Obviously, environmental impact reviews are important, but since bike, pedestrian, and transit infrastructure are so well demonstrated to be environmentally beneficial, that such reviews are often counterproductive. This was one of the 3 bills Streets for All sent an action alert about. Next slide. And this bill easily passed the state legislature, thankfully. Next slide. The next bill would have effectively halted bike and scooter sharing in California because it would have outlawed the liability waivers that users currently sign. These waivers protect providers from legal liability from injuries from things like bad road conditions and reckless riding, etc. We also sent out an email about this issue. And next slide. Thankfully, this language was modified and bikes and scooters live to see another day. The last bill would require new developments to include bike parking. So car parking has been mandated by law for decades. So having bike parking is a small yet important piece to putting 2 wheels on the same level of accessibility and ease of use as cars. Next slide. And luckily, this also passed.
Thank you, Taranig. send it over to Josh, who's gonna go through some Metro stuff real quick.
Thanks, Michael. So I'm Josh, and I'm going to talk about some of the updates to Metro's budget. They just released their draft budget for 2021 last week. If you go to the next slide, the biggest thing is that Metro has a huge budget shortfall going into next year. It's about a 16% budget reduction, even though they got almost $1 billion extra from the CARES Act from the federal government. If you go to the next slide, one of the most impactful places for this cuts are going to be to service. There's going to be almost a 20% cut to service at least through next summer. And less frequent service is going to mean more crowded buses, and during a pandemic that is dangerous for essential workers and riders. It's also bad when you're trying to launch a new service plan like NextGen. Bus ridership is almost 20% or is almost 70% of all the ridership for Metro. And it's a good plan with better coverage and better stop spacing, but this is not a good time to launch it. If you go to the next slide, the other thing to keep in mind is Metro sort of earmarks $130 million for these next gen improvements, but only around 7 million of that is actually going towards like general improvements to the whole bus network. The rest of it is going towards like 4 specific plazas and 4 other like pre-existing BRT planned routes. So really need advocates to like jump out and be like, hey, we need a lot more improvements, especially to bus shelters and dedicated bus lanes across the system. If you go to the next slide, there are 2 good things that have sort of come out of the Metro's negotiations over the last couple months, and one of them is a approved motion for free transit, at least to pilot it for the next couple quarters. This is a huge equity win, I think, for pretty obvious reasons. And it also makes sense sort of from a fiscally responsible point of view. Fare enforcement or fare revenue right now is super low, and enforcement is expensive. Metro also has one of the lowest fare box recovery rates in the whole country. So there's a really good chance this is going to end up saving Metro money, at least through the pandemic. The other really cool thing that Metro's doing is they've, like a lot of agencies, responded to how they use police on their system, which advocates have been asking for a really long time. So there's 4 new motions that got approved. One of them is going to study a community-based approach to public safety. One of them is just reviewing the force training policies that police officers go through. One of them is going to make sure Metro assets are only used for civilian transportation purposes. And then the last one is developing a clear criteria for suspending service in emergencies. If you want to give input for the Metro board meeting, that's on September 16th. They're probably going to adopt their budget near the end of the month. You can also just email your public comment to them. We really need advocates asking for better improvements to the next gen system and to return service levels back to normal as soon as possible.
Thanks, Josh. Over to Kyle to talk about not just Trump versus Biden, but there's local elections that are really going to impact our lives. So go for it, Kyle.
Hi, I'm Kyle, and this is my happy hour juice box. Next slide. So addressing transportation in LA necessarily means addressing the power discrepancy between residents and their representation. As a political action committee, Streets for All has that special privilege to do just that. We highlight upcoming elections and elevate those candidates we feel best reflect the values of transparency, equity, and progressive transportation policy. In order to do that, though, we first need to understand where they stand on the issues. So we created a survey to send to each candidate for this November, covering Council District 4, District 10, Culver City, West Hollywood, Santa Monica, and Downey. In CD4, Nithya Rahman is challenging incumbent David Root. Each has had the opportunity to answer a robust set of questions to clarify their plans once elected. We've decided to endorse Nithya based on her proactive leadership on issues of climate and mobility justice, homelessness, government transparency, and more. Go to nithyaforthecity.com to learn more about her campaign. In CD10, we have Grace Yu and Mark Ridley Thomas running to fill Herb Wesson's vacated seat. Endorsements for either candidate are still being considered at the moment. Now, LA being the diverse, fast-moving place it is, many residents may not actually know which local elections apply to them for these 2 districts. So here you can see the respective boundaries, first for CD4, and then for neighboring CD10. These maps don't just live in this presentation though. We're happy to share the link to the online version we've created for public use. Know who's accountable for getting the infrastructure improvements that matter to you. In Santa Monica, there are 21 candidates facing issues such as sustainability, local traffic, and land use. In Culver City, we have 9 candidates looking for potential endorsement. We asked about community-specific issues there in addition to the common LA problems. And in West Hollywood, there are 7 candidates who are facing such issues as the micromobility ban there, residents' push for more complete streets projects, and various street projects and difficulties that they're experiencing. Our reach, like the issues we're invested in, stretches throughout the entire county. There are 5 candidates running in Downey, an area working to improve their green space, tenants' rights, and firefighter support. So that's a look at our election involvement. We'll be formally announcing endorsements in the coming week. Sign up for the email blast to get the first word. If you want to go further and get directly involved in the election, head to streetsforall.org/get-involved. Whatever area you live in, we could use your support. The people of LA all want the same greener, more equitable, more livable future. Come join us to ensure those values are better reflected at the ballot box and ultimately in our leadership. Now, on to our special guest.
Thank you, Cal. Guys, can we let Seleta unmute herself?
Done.
Seleta, are you there?
I am.
What's your favorite drink, since we're all sharing ours?
Oh, my favorite drink? I think my top 3 drinks would be a hot cup of straight ahead black tea, PG Tips black tea, a gin martini, a dirty gin martini, and I think I might throw in the 3rd spot, Fresca. So just want to keep it old school because I think that LaCroix Pamplemousse is a pretender to the Fresca throne.
That was a very comprehensive answer.
Thank you. Thank you. I think about it a lot.
I could tell. Well, thank you so much for being here. It means a lot to us. And it also means a lot to the over 100 people that RSVP'd and want to learn more about how our city works. So if it's all right, I'm going to ask you just a few questions and then we'll open it up and see. We've already gotten a few questions with that link and I will present them shortly. So the first question we wanted to ask you is, change is happening at a very quick pace right now. People look at places like London, Paris, New York, San Francisco. They're moving really quickly to make sure that when we come out of the other side of COVID, we have bus and bike lanes and don't return to even more cars than we had before. And I think a lot of people are sort of thinking, what's wrong with LA? Why can't we move as quickly as other places here? And I was curious what you think is holding LA back and what advocates can do to accelerate bus and bike lanes across the city.
Well, I think, first of all, one of the things that was plain to me at the beginning of the pandemic was, what I was seeing a lot of on transportation Twitter. And really, it wasn't just confined to transportation Twitter. It was really whatever your agenda was pre-pandemic. There was a kind of this moment where everybody was doubling down on those agendas and saying things like, if we don't take advantage of this moment, then we will have blown our opportunity to, save the planet, prevent gentrification, whatever your agenda was. And I found that kind of opportunism to be extremely off-putting because I felt like it missed a very clear signal to all of us to be still for a minute and think deeply about the kinds of things that we want to see in our city and why. And what we observed during we looked at a number of different pieces of data, including street light data, which is comprehensive transportation data, our own ATSAC data, our counts, some of Metro's data, some qualitative data. And we began to piece together a story about what was going on in our city during COVID. And what we observed is that when you teased apart the travel trends, we looked at it through an income of class. So we looked at it by income, and we looked at it through a lens of race. So we looked at what was happening for Black and Brown communities specifically. And what we observed is that in those communities, people's vehicle miles traveled were actually increasing over the course of the pandemic. And we don't have real data because we don't get data from a lot of private and companies and technology platforms. But our nickel theory is that a lot of people in those communities lost their jobs because they were supporting either retail or entertainment or tourism. And then they had to go take what was left, which were jobs in the gig economy, driving for Instacart, Amazon, Whole Foods, whoever. And so when I look at that kind of data, what strikes me is that the problems that we need to solve are really directly related to how we connect people to opportunity, to income, and how we do that through mobility. And while transforming our city overnight into a place that has a lot of protected bike lanes and bus lanes is something that I've worked on really hard my whole career, I also felt like we needed to take a step back and think more creatively about the actual problems that we were trying to solve. There's a quote that I give pretty frequently, which is that in LA County, you can reach about 12 times as many jobs in an hour by car that you can in an hour by transit. And that has to do with decades of racist land use decisions and racist infrastructure decisions. And in order to close that gap without buying everybody a vehicle, yes, we need to build bus lanes. Yes, we need to build bike lanes, but there are a whole bunch of other things that we need to do with respect to the direct deployment and delivery of services into those communities so that people have access to opportunity. And I think that, organizations like Streets for All are filled with non-traditional thinkers, iconoclasts, people who are not comfortable with the status quo. And these are exactly the kind of communities where I want to see more of that creative conversation happening. Now, directly to your question about infrastructure, during the last several months, we actually have built considerably more lanes of complete streets or bike and bus infrastructure than we have in the recent past. And that has to do more with the fact that we've been doing the outreach, we've been in community, and we had an opportunity to build those projects quickly and cheaply because there was a lull in the traffic that was out there. But skipping past that moment of being in community and hearing from community isn't necessarily something that that I was comfortable doing or that I had a mandate to do.
So the mandate part is interesting, and I wanted to ask you. I don't think everyone is always aware of the way LA works. We have a weaker mayor system here than other cities, and we have 15 council members that often decide what does and doesn't happen. And as general manager of our Department of Transportation, how do you think about that? How do you navigate that? How do we get to a citywide bike network, for example, if it crosses through 4 council districts and 1 council member doesn't want it? What do you do about that?
Well, I think that so far, when it comes to programmatic decisions, my observation is that the city council seems to be aligned in disallowing individual council members to opt out of programs. So Recicla is an example, right, where the city was trying to change over the way we did waste collection and recycling. And you couldn't allow an individual council district to opt out. Micromobility is another example, right? There are council members on the city council who wanted a carve out of their entire district for the scooter and bike program that LADOT was creating and regulating and overseeing. And the council was aligned in saying, you can't do that. We cannot set a precedent where individual council offices can opt out of programmatic services that the city provides. That attitude does not seem to extend to infrastructure. Anytime we're touching something physical in a council district, the council has a completely different posture, which is that if the street is in somebody's district, it is considered their dirt, and they get veto power. So you can see that in the bus only lanes that proceed, and they're solid, and then they drop off in Beverly Hills and they disappear in Condo Canyon because individual jurisdictions and council members opted out of those projects. And until we have a change in either the way that council districts defer to one another when it comes to those kinds of decisions, or we have an upstream effort like the one you're describing to proactively endorse and support candidates who are going to be willing to push forward with projects that may have impacts and may create some churn in the community, then I don't know that we're going to be able to, I don't know that we're going to see a big change in that reality. And so my perspective has been, look, there are lots of places in Los Angeles where, we do have supportive council members, and where we have large neighborhoods wholly contained inside a single council district, where we should focus on build out of a network inside those neighborhoods, because individual projects, which is kind of where we still are pretty good. You have to start somewhere, but it's really that network that's the secret sauce in getting that big jump in the number of people who feel comfortable getting on a bike or or using some form of mobility that's not their vehicles. And so, there's plenty of positive work that we can do there while we play the long game of trying to change the composition and the posture of the city council.
Has it been frustrating?
What do you think, Michael?
I don't want to put words in your mouth.
I mean,
Okay.
yeah, it's challenging without question, but I made a decision a long time ago that I was going to work inside a system. And so that decision requires me to make certain choices and to deal with certain realities and to deal with those kinds of roadblocks. They are a fact. They were a fact in San Francisco where I worked before. They were a fact in Oakland where I worked before that. They're a fact in a lot of places. And if I were to spend too much energy on those individual frustrations, I would never be able to get anything done. And so, yeah, it's frustrating, but it's not personal. And so we got to pick it up and keep it moving, and look for champions who are willing to support taking risks on how streets are designed. A truth in most places I've worked is that people in neighborhoods and communities are generally willing to sort of accept congestion. They sort of don't understand exactly why we have congestion, and they sort of accept it as a fact of life until you make a change on the street. And then the minute you change the street, you own that congestion. It's your problem. And there are, I've witnessed a lot of different elected and policymakers in my career, and they handle that moment in a wide variety of ways. But it is the pressure that is applied to them is real. The frustrations are also real. However, in my experience, they are also temporary. And so the question is, do those elected leaders have the support they need to sustain themselves through those challenging peaks of the sort of change curve?
That's a great segue into our first audience question. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay. So this is near and dear to my heart because I worked really hard on this, and we found out last night it wasn't moving forward.
Yeah, I saw that.
But yeah, I mean, I think Jonah's
well, it's
question.
not moving forward today.
Sure. It's not moving forward in the next 2 years, and we'll see who gets in 2022 when Paul Koretz is termed out. But I think this is a very valid question because, and maybe this is just the personality of individual council members, but if near unanimous support and multiple neighborhood councils and schools and religious institutions and businesses and everything else all want something, and it's not a budget issue because the money's coming from the state, and that's not enough. You know, where does that leave us as a city? And as Jonah says, how do we work to help advance mobility if that's the status quo?
Yeah. Well, I would say a few things. So first of all, take heart. That project would not have even been in the dialogue if it had not been for the work of all of the organizations that you just mentioned. That in and of itself is progress, because the second thing that you accomplished, or that was accomplished in the moment, is that the council member had to make decisions in daylight, had to own those decisions, and had to be transparent about them. And that has not always been the case. I've done everything I can to make sure that, you know, elected leaders are if they are going to sort of assert themselves in that way, that they do it in a way that is clear to their constituents, and they do it in a way that is not opaque, right? That is in front of the outside the room where it happens, and not inside the room where it happens. And that is not always the case. And so I think that is also, you know, sometimes you have to comfort yourself with the progress you've made. And the other thing you have to remember is that there are streets in every city that we come back to over and over and over again. Telegraph Avenue in the city of Oakland was a street where when I was the bike and ped coordinator there, we were trying to put in bike lanes down Telegraph Avenue. And I went to countless meetings with, you know, a mix of really excited people and really angry people. We got a grant, we did a trial run, we were going to put the thing in, and then the city got sued and the whole thing died. And that happened a few more times before it actually came to life. And now there is a protected bike lane on Telegraph in Oakland that is now extending up through the Temescal neighborhood, and hopefully will connect with those lanes that go all the way to Cal in the city of Berkeley. Market Street in San Francisco is another one. Sometimes your job is to plant the seed for something that, but you aren't necessarily the one that gets to be there to cut the ribbon or to see it happen. And I think of Uplift Melrose as one of those projects. This project is one that, you know, there are a few sort of straw men that got put up as, you know, reasons not to support the project. And the long game is to get new elected leadership, and the short game is to knock down those straw men, because the Caltrans money is not the only money that exists. And there are other ways to keep this project alive and keep it moving along without it dying off completely. So I would also just say, you know, take heart. This is a big city. There's 7,500 miles of streets. There are a lot of places that need desperately really effective organizing and advocacy to step into a vacuum and make sure that they get over the finish line. And so, you know, you're going to win some, you're going to lose some. Don't take it personally. See that there were victories in what occurred. And then, you know, on to the next.
It feels like a therapy session. So thank you. You're making me feel
You're welcome. I've been doing this a long time, Michael.
So this is a really relevant question from Sara. You know, oftentimes communities that are the loudest get stuff first, and oftentimes people don't have the luxury of being the loudest, showing up at neighborhood council, city council meetings, etc. So what do you think we can do to ensure equitable access to all communities, whether or not they're the most vocal?
So this is a great question, and it's one that I've spent a lot of time thinking about. And Slow Streets was a tricky one in particular, because you know, when I looked at the Black Lives Matter platform for transportation in Oakland, and then in you know, other places, there's a lot of things on that platform that we could be working together to advance, including free transit, other things. Slow streets isn't really on the list. And it wasn't necessarily, I was extremely aware of the sensitivity of going into a community that was being disproportionately impacted by the virus because it's a respiratory disease, and these are communities that sit in the shadow of freeways. And so they have comorbidities because you know, LADOT even, you know, made decisions that created those outcomes. And so for government to come in and try and just put things in, because that would be one way to handle this. Well, let's roll out a map and let's make sure that we distribute these things equitably in a very top-down way. That struck me as really the wrong approach. But if the right approach was going to be to find community partnerships and sponsors and do things that way, then we needed to invest resources in making sure that we solve for the problem that you're raising, Sara. That, you know, we did. We brought on board KDI, which is a community-based sort of nonprofit consulting firm that had executed our Play Streets program, which is another sort of community-driven program that aims to, you know, give kids who live in park-poor neighborhoods access to play by turning their streets into playgrounds. And so we brought them. They had already made a lot of those connections and had credibility relationships in exactly the neighborhoods that we knew would not come and ask us for slow streets or necessarily have the resources to sponsor them. And as a result, I mean, I think we're going to be at about 50 miles of slow streets projects in the next week or so. And we have a majority of them, a large percentage of them, that are in low-income neighborhoods. So I appreciate the question. It's a problem that I struggle with nightly. Like, what is that right balance between a top-down approach that is heavy-handed and a bottom-up approach that might benefit the people who know how to access resources and who understand how to get things from government. And so that was our solution: invest resources in a firm that could go out and help us fill that gap.
I want to be respectful of your time. We have a few other great questions. Are you okay for a few more minutes?
Sure.
Okay. So I found this personally really interesting because Metro proposed as one of the options a shared bus and bike lane on this BRT project through Eagle Rock on Colorado Boulevard, and that would remove an existing bike lane. And so, you know, there's people that are brave enough to bike in a bus lane, but not everyone is. And so would love to get your thoughts. It's a great question.
So I am not, Bryn, I don't know if we've weighed in formally. I caught wind of this proposal. It's not something that my staff has brought to me and sort of asked for my perspective on it. But it does, you know, we had a similar challenge on Van Nuys up in Pacoima and into Council District 7 and into Council District 6, where the sort of options that we were getting they created what seemed to me to be a false choice between narrow sidewalks and BRT. And so we definitely, we invested a lot of staff time and energy in those designs, and along with the planning department, who was a huge advocate of keeping the wide sidewalks, to try and force that conversation, that design conversation, to move in a different direction. I mean, this is, so I guess you're saying that we could narrow the travel lanes and make it all work. And that was part of the approach that we took on Van Nuys. And so we are always going to advocate to try and keep those modes separate. It's very, very clear that if you are taking a systems approach to safety, which is a Vision Zero approach to safety, then the greater the volume, speed, and weight of the adjacent, vehicles in the adjacent lane, the greater separation is required for vulnerable users. And it's certainly, through Eagle Rock, that has to be the case. This is through 14, right?
Yes.
14. So I'm really hopeful that we have a really progressive and a new advocate sitting in that seat. I think that district is suffering from a lack of representation, and I'm hoping that we can maybe figure out a way to keep conversations like this one moving in the right direction when we have that leadership on board. But I'll certainly go back and ask my staff if we've weighed in yet or not, and see what we can do.
This is a fun one.
My favorite place to ride my bike in LA. So my favorite ride actually is down Sunset Boulevard. So I live in Silver Lake, and my route to work is down Sunset Boulevard, and then I turn on Figueroa, and then I turn onto 2nd Street, and then I'm in downtown by headquarters. And I've been riding that route on and off since I got here in 2014. And I love it so much because I get to see so many different neighborhoods. I get to have eyes on the infrastructure. I get to see, and my engineers hate it because I always come into the office and have several requests for changes on that route. There's still that intersection at Figueroa and 2nd that needs a better bike detector to trigger that arrow, for example. But that's really my favorite route. And then my other favorite route is, wherever Ciclovia is happening. And it is, I have not missed very many of them since I've been here. And I just think that those events are, wherever they are one of the most special things about the city.
Question from Luke regarding Senate Bill 288.
Yeah, I thought that was really strange. Look, I appreciate the question. I thought that was really strange, his veto last time around. And I know that, part of that was because I think, and you might know this better than I do, but the budget office, somehow somebody got the budget office to weigh in and say that that bill was going to cost the state, billions of dollars, because it was projecting all kinds of crazy things.
I think it was 20 million per mile or some.
Yeah, absurd.
Yeah.
I have not heard anything about 288 in that same way. And so I'm hopeful that he is going to sign it, but I haven't heard much about that one.
Question from Andres. Biggest challenge or roadblock you've encountered at LADOT?
So I think that and I think you're asking here about inside the department, right? So there were two things. So the first thing was, when I got here, I was the 8th general manager in the last 14 years, right? So think about what that kind of turnover in executive leadership does to the morale of the people who work in the department. And the general manager who had preceded me had, the city was in a similar situation that it is now, incredibly difficult budgetary challenges and constraints, and had made a lot of very top-down decisions that kind of flattened the organization. And it's not a secret that about 300 LADOT staffers marched over to city council and testified that they had lost faith in him and they wanted him fired, and then the mayor fired him. So the morale when I got here, there was a flyer that was waiting for me on my chair my first day of work that had a picture of the Golden Gate Bridge and Mike Bloomberg, because Jeanette Sadiq Khan, who was working for Bloomberg Philanthropies, had been one of the people who had recruited me. So it had a picture of Mike Bloomberg and Golden Gate Bridge, and some nasty little thing about like something about a San Francisco treat. I don't know. It wasn't nice. And so I knew that one of my biggest challenges was going to be convincing the people inside the department that I cared about them, and that I was here and I was going to stick around, and that I wasn't going to be shy about trying to push the envelope. I had a proactive agenda that I wanted to move forward, but that I was going to listen to them. And then the second biggest challenge was that there was an engineer named John Fisher. He actually still sits on the National Committee for Uniform Traffic Control Devices, and I think he might live in Pasadena, but he is a longtime engineer at LADOT, and he really had set up this system of doing design that was almost like how you would build a widget in a factory, because he wanted to have sort of the absolute last word and control over every design that the department issued. Now, some of the reasons for that were good. That you get consistency, you get you know, an eye on you know, you get a single person who gets to set the bar for the design. But the bad part is that nobody down the line is empowered to take ownership of their work, and they are also not necessarily understanding the value of every part of, you know, soup to nuts, from the moment that a project is a twinkle in somebody's eye to the time when you finished the evaluation of that thing and it's been in place for a year. That planners and you know, people who are specialists in community outreach, and people who understand sort of landscape architecture, beautification, greening, all of those skill sets are just as critical to the success of a project as the engineer who stamps the plans. And so trying to change that culture has been another challenge that I think we've made a lot of progress on. But it's a big bureaucracy, and it is culture change takes time. So both of those things I would categorize as sort of culture change.
Thank you. So very last question, and I'm sorry we couldn't get to everybody's. Want to end on this note. What do you want advocates to do to make your job easier? What could this community do, all very impassioned, smart people, to see real change in Los Angeles and help you?
So first of all, you know, in my previous jobs, when, you know, in San Francisco, that has an incredibly, you know, large, powerful advocacy organization in the San Francisco Bike Coalition. I also lived in Seattle for a few years, a consultant there, and the Cascade Bike Coalition is another kind of advocacy juggernaut. It was clear to me that the progress that is available to a city really requires the professional layer of the city, that's who I represent, to be creative, open-minded, innovative, but also objective. It requires the political and elected layer of the city to be strong-willed and to have the ability to withstand those peaks and valleys of change. And then it absolutely requires, on equal footing with those other two buckets, a credible and impassioned advocacy organization. And without that piece, that advocacy piece, there is a limit on what I'm going to be able to accomplish. You know, several years ago, you know, one of the hardest things I've had to do in my career was go out to the west side of Los Angeles and remove a bike lane that we had put in because a 16-year-old girl had been hit and killed by a car going probably 50 miles an hour out by Dockweiler Beach. And I knew that, you know, we fought very hard in LADOT not to put that street back the way that it was, but everybody has a boss, and my boss told me to take out the bike lanes. So and without you know, what we were getting was piles and piles of emails from, you know, the anti-road diet crowd, and there wasn't that force and that voice to say, no, this isn't right, and we're going to fight like hell to keep this bike lane intact. And so, you know, that was a hard lesson, that without, I again am inside a system. There's a limit to the amount of advocacy I can do. There's a specific role that I need to play, and I'm going to do my damnedest to play it to the best of my ability. But there's a limit there. So that kind of street level advocacy, knocking on doors, email campaigns, organizing, getting people to show up, getting people to testify in transportation committee, in front of council, getting people to apply pressure to council offices who have been able to escape accountability. Those things are the things that are incredibly useful and valuable to me, even though they can sometimes feel thankless to you. They are an essential ingredient in, I think, what we're all trying to accomplish.
Well, thank you so much. And guys, we had a group discussion planned, but Seleta was very generous staying over time. We ran over, so we're going to save that for next time. But Seleta, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And hopefully we can do this again. And I think I speak for everyone on this call saying that we want to fill that void, and we definitely want to push the city for the future. And next month, everybody, we're going to have Adele, who's the general manager of Streets LA, who's Seleta's counterpart in the Bureau of Street Services. And so it'll be an interesting conversation to see how the two work together and how we can help both agencies seize the future.
Yeah,
So,
keep up the great work. We need y'all. Thanks.
Thanks so much. All right, everybody. So it is 6 o'clock. Again, I apologize. We didn't get to the group discussion we wanted to, but I hope you found that really valuable with Seleta. I'm sorry we didn't get to everyone's questions. We'll do a better time. This is our first time. We will do a better time next time of managing our time in the beginning and leave a lot more time for group discussion, because we don't want to just talk at people. We really want this to be interactive. So we'll put up the Adele event starting tomorrow. Please RSVP. The Bureau of Street Services is a hugely important part of this puzzle too. And it should be a very interesting conversation with Adele, who truly does care about this stuff as well. So thanks for coming, and have a great night.